Talofa lava, this is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. O lo'ingo o Susana Suisui. Coming up, spy firms exploit Pacific-based mobile operators to track people on the other side of the globe. Also,
pastoral support and care for them in country and for their families back home.
Church leaders from around the region want to play a role in caring for Pacific seasonal workers. And later,
it's about family and it's about love for our community. That's at the core of it.
A new documentary shows a softer side of Pasifika rugby players. An Australian-owned mobile phone operator in the Pacific is likely to have been used by private spies to track people on the other side of the world and steal their data. Digicel Pacific's network resources have been exploited to target unsuspecting mobile phone users in Africa, and a type of attack that's been used in the past by spy-for-hire operations and state actors. Alicia Foon spoke with Organised Crime and Corruption Reporting Project Pacific editor Dan McGarry, who was part of the investigation.
Well, we came across this data based on another research report. It didn't name Digicel Pacific, but I noticed a line entry that said, a South Pacific telco. When we looked into it, we found out that resources belonging to Digicel Pacific had been used for quite some time to conduct thousands, tens of thousands, in fact, of queries that one researcher called blatant and clearly malicious. So obviously this is a matter of real concern. It appears that what's happened is that Digicel allowed certain of its network resources to be leased out to third parties, and these resources were used by effectively espionage for hire companies, spies for hire, to conduct surveillance operations against various individuals. We approached Telstra, which acquired Digicel a little over a year ago, with the issue. They were aware of it. They had taken some action already, and they took additional action based on the data that they saw. However, we are still seeing continuing activity dating up until mid-August. That's the latest data that we have. So it's a matter of ongoing concern.
Now, this kind of leasing to third parties, how common is that?
Telstra, for example, doesn't lease these things. They're called global titles, basically. It's kind of a way that you identify yourself on the network. It's like a phone number, but used only by telecoms. They don't lease theirs out at all, and for very good reason. Digicel Pacific not only leases them out, but they allow them to be used using other network. So basically, somebody can come along and they can obtain one of these global titles from Digicel Pacific. They can take it to a different part of the world, log on to the network from there, and use it to conduct surveillance. They can find a person's phone location. They can even access the phone's GPS, for example. They can intercept text messages and voice calls, things like that. So it's quite concerning. The problem is that when they're working on these third-party networks, when they're working outside of Digicel Pacific itself, the telco has no way of knowing how these global titles are being used. And as it turns out, we've seen, the data shows us that we've seen about 20,000 malicious or questionable queries over the last 12 to 14 month period. So there's a lot of activity. It is slowly being reduced. Telstra is taking efforts to try and curtail it, but the activity hasn't stopped as far as the latest data shows us.
This sounds like a little bit of a loophole, which makes the Pacific an easy target.
Well, it's kind of a door that Digicel opened for itself. As I say, a lot of telcos just don't lease out these global titles. The decision to lease them out, and furthermore, to allow them to be used outside of their own network, is, I think, in retrospect, probably something that they'd like to take back. And in fact, they are making efforts now to take that back.
Has the Australian government had anything to say about this?
They referred our questions to Telstra, and basically they said in a sentence or so that the company brings strong capabilities into the Digicel Pacific business, and it has the necessary experience and expertise to enhance the security and reliability of Digicel Pacific's networks. I'm just quoting from the from the statement that was sent to us from Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs. So clearly they still have confidence in Telstra. They believe their investment to the tune of about $1.3 billion is validated. Our experts are saying that there are ongoing concerns, however.
And that Australian funding came amid fears that China's government could use the network, is that right?
That's right. And that's actually one of the concerns that we have with this kind of activity, because China has used exactly these resources elsewhere in the world, using a different telco to spy on American citizens. So we know that they have the capability. And as one of our experts says, if it's easy for some people to lease these global titles, it's just as easy for China as it would be for any other adversary. So we don't know who is conducting this current spate of attacks, but we can't say it's not any particular state or actor.
The Pacific Conference of Churches in Fiji says it's keen to provide pastoral care to the families and workers of the New Zealand and Australia seasonal work schemes. Its General Secretary, Reverend James Bhagwan, told Rachel Nath that the challenges the workers and their families face were raised during a recent Regional Church Council consultation in Fiji.
We were looking at what are the challenges faced by our workers in terms of treatment of workers, the conditions in which they work under, but also the challenges, the pastoral challenges that they experience when they're away from home, and also not forgetting that we need to also pay attention to the families that they leave behind when they go to do migrant labor. And so we looked at a number of issues around coordination, the role of the church in working with labor sending units. These are the government departments that facilitate these processes. What sort of preparation can be done in their pre-departure or even before they are selected? How do we create better awareness of the expectations of the situation that they will experience when they go and work abroad? What sort of pastoral support is required before they leave? On arrival, work pastoral support and care for them in country and for their families back home, and the issues that we need to keep in mind as they're also preparing to come back. How do they come back, re-engage with their communities and their families?
Did you narrow down on what kind of support will be needed from the church?
I don't think narrow is the right word to use. We looked at the key areas that we need to engage in, recognizing there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of partners that are involved from governments, both receiving and sending governments, what type of policies and frameworks they have, recognizing that we need to have good relationships and understanding with the communities from where our workers come from, communities that they go to, and how they engage. The role of the employers, which is very important in understanding the cultural aspects, values, etc. of our people, and how the churches in our Pacific Island countries and the churches in the receiving countries, so Australia and, of course, New Zealand as well, coordinate better in caring for workers. So there's a lot of support, a lot of engagement from both sides on this issue. We're very grateful that the Australian government is willing to listen and engage with us on this process. We also had representatives from the New Zealand High Commission and Pacific Island missions that are based in Suva in attendance. Presentations also included representatives from the ILO, the International Labour Organization in the Pacific, the International Organization on Migration, and the Pacific Islands Forum. So it was a really good round table to thresh out some issues, develop some sort of frameworks and some next steps on what we can do and how we can continue to build on this work. This is the first time that we're having this sort of consultation. So although the schemes have been going on for some time, this is the first time that churches are seriously engaging and recognizing their role, and governments are also recognizing the role of the church in this space.
The Papua New Guinea Prime Minister James Marape led an entourage to Lai in Murubwe province on Thursday for a development forum over the planned Wafi Gopu gold mining venture just 65 kilometres from the city. The forum followed a similar event in Porgera, which was marred by tribal fighting. Negotiations with landowners are still continuing for the Wafi Gopu venture. The Porgera mine, which has been shut down for 3 years, is set to resume operation in the next few months, if the lawlessness in Inga province can be brought under control. RNZ Pacific's PNG correspondent Scott Waire spoke with Mr. Marape about both mining operations.
Just give us from the Prime Minister's perspective, what are your expectations for the two mines, Porgera and Wafi Gopu?
Well, for the first time now, before these two mines that we've negotiated, all benefit has always been under 50%. This one now, the benefit's about 50%. So there's always a cost to every mine project that happens, but because of the cost to environment, cost to people, cost to the community, we negotiate to secure more within the space or framework of the present laws we have. And the investors have hit us. We also give respect to the internal rate of return. So the rate of return on investments was not offended. They will make profit, but the residual benefit, not just equity and royalty, but a little bit of more tax. You heard about the 2% fiscal stability tax. The overall scheme of things, local content conversations, conversation on infrastructure development, the additional benefits being passed to the landowners and the project area provinces in terms of infrastructure development. All in all, government contribution, company contribution in the name of the projects are better, and far better than the previous Porgera or the previous mine projects in the country. So a good outcome today, this development forum process is just the new process that must be retired. Landowners must give consent, basically, that the mine must go ahead. They must understand what benefit is there for them. They're happy because these projects are long-term projects anyway. So landowner consent is very important. And not just landowner, but identifying proper landowners, those who are entitled to be defined as SML or those who are entitled to be defined as LMP and additional project area interested groups. Those conversations take place in a development forum process. I think it is, in my view, one of better resource harvest arrangements anywhere on planet Earth. Many countries on Earth don't give respect to landowners or indigenous people. Papua New Guinea is a tribal-based country. Our people hold rights to the land, and this process gives them access to the project agreement and allow them to also negotiate amongst themselves on how they split what is good for them.
We've got issues in Porgera, legacy issues in Porgera that are still in existence, and that came about at the forum in Wabek. What are your thoughts on it? How is the government dealing with it?
I see it this way. If the Porgera resource was depleted, the investors are no more around, then there'll be no address on the legacy issues. So it is now lucky for the country, lucky for the landowners. There's still sufficient reserve in the SML project area footprint or the SML area. So we've renegotiated a better outcome. And considering what was not done before, this negotiation addresses these issues like resettlement, better compensation to them, better benefit to them. So take into consideration the deficiencies of the first SML and the mine life period. The second lease of life, we improved on securing better so that issues like resettlement that is outstanding is addressed. Government has set aside 700 million kina for infrastructure development grant. That hopefully they themselves discussed that. Let's address the resettlement issue and some of the legacy issues. So we're picking up from what was not addressed before in the first life of Porgera. The new benefits we've secured addresses those legacy issues, and we will reconcile them and do better going forward.
There's a lot of international media attention on the negativities happening in Enga. From your perspective as Prime Minister, how are we addressing it?
As I was saying, we're structuring short-term approach, special police operation to step in and deal with the issues head-on where they're happening. The last I heard of the 3 or 4 tribal fights that has been happening in the province have sort of subsided, but police have been asked to deal with this issue on a short-term basis, but in the long run, we're restructuring police up there, and the shared security arrangement with defense, we're looking at the arrangement. I am of the view that we will be recalling defense sometimes into the future, that we empower our policemen. And there's a special elite police force being built up to have a handle on those who directly cause problem in country. There's a law we are proposing in the long run, those who start trouble fight, we're looking at giving them life imprisonment. life imprisonment. So police will be beefed up in Enga province. We look at the police leadership, additional operation police to be up there. We purely want to take control of Enga through a police approach and not a combined security force approach. Knowing that Pogra is in Enga province, that is one reason also, but better still, our people deserve security. The road that leads into Pogra and into Wabek has seen people moving up and down with guns, and the new police team that we're setting up. I'm not at a stage to disclose exactly what structure of police the police commissioner is setting up, but a special unit is being pulled together, not just for Enga, but anywhere in the country. We're setting up a special police unit, highly lethal. We'll have a specific code of operation that is beyond the current police to deal with what we label as domestic terrorism occurrences in our country. This tribal fight and these killings are domestic terrorism. We are labeling at the highest. The special police forces set up. I'm going to Israel very soon. We will also negotiating on specific trainers from Israel police and military to come here. This special police unit will be set up to ensure that they deal with the hotspots. As I speak to you, there's a growing concern on dual use of military. We're trying to get, and we're eroding the functionality of military in what they're supposed to be. Sometimes in the not too distant future, all military will be back in the barracks, and we just get police to do police job.
A feature-length documentary about the Rugby World Cup preparations of Pacific teams will be televised this weekend. Family Faith Footy, a Pasifika rugby story, features personal accounts of players from Samoa, Fiji and Tonga ahead of the Rugby World Cup, which kicks off next weekend. Fino Fonua spoke to the film's producer, Adrian Stevenon.
How did you come up with the idea, or who came up with the idea to do this kind of documentary?
The idea, I think, in part has been swirling around by many people wanting to tell this story, but it was one that was brought to us by a sports journalist who was interested in making it, his name's Gregor Paul. He didn't have the television experience to bring this to life, and he also was quite clear that this needed to be told by Pacific people. And so from there, we got interest from TVNZ. New Zealand On Air has supported it, and 7 months later, this is what we have, a documentary that's been shot in 6 different countries, talking to many of the players that mean a lot or have done a lot in New Zealand, and now they're doing great things in the islands, which is amazing. And they've also made their mark in Europe.
And what is this documentary about?
It's got lots of story threads, but at the heart of the story, it's about players, it's about family, and it's about love for our community. That's at the core of it. Family Faith Footy, a Pasifika rugby story, it really is about celebrating our rugby players and our communities and our families. It's a story about small islands with big dreams and the sacrifices that many, many, many have made to produce some of the world's greatest players. And, we get to hear from the players themselves and the families themselves. It also sets the historical context in which many players were up against racial discrimination and things like that in the early 70s and 60s when Pacific people in New Zealand were trying to break through. It introduces a younger audience to the stories of and the significance of players like Brian Williams, Sir Michael Jones. It retells some of the story about the success of the 91 World Cup Manu Samoa team and what their success did to putting players on the world map. And it also tells that story of how Pacific players went from being a little bit of a trickle in a few teams, and now it's a flood around the world where Pacific players are the most in-demand players in the world.
And who is interviewed, who's followed in this documentary? We
talk to a lot of players. We've got a couple of central characters in Charles Piutau and Malakai Feketoa, but we also, we hear from Michael Ala'alatoa, Pat Lam, Pandi Aki, Manu Tuilangi, Sam Tuitipo, Sir Michael Jones, Lauli for Michael Jones, Tuifasasina, Sir Brian Williams, Billy Vunipola, Miracle Fa'ilangi, Seta Tamani Vandu. We talk to all the coaches, and we're inside all of the teams of Manu Samoa, Ikaletahi, and the Fiji Water Flying Fijians. So we've really tried to incorporate all of the Pacific views, get as many different types of stories but they all really focus around family, faith, and footy.
And what was something that was revealing to you when you heard these players speak?
Well, what I'll say is I personally haven't seen rugby players speak like this, like they have in this documentary. I haven't seen rugby players make themselves as vulnerable and emotional. We often see rugby players in short sound bites after a game and or at a press conference, but to be with them in their homes as they tell their own stories was something quite special. A lot of the boys get really emotional when they talk about their mothers, when they talk about their families, the sacrifice that their families have made for them, and now in turn the weight of responsibility that they have to make the best of the opportunities that they've been provided. And we may have heard some of those stories, but seeing it with the emotion that is told by the players and the family themselves is really quite moving, and it's something special.
That's Pacific Waves for today. Don't forget you can listen back on rnzi.com/programs. We're also on Apple, Spotify and iHeartRadio podcasts. From myself and the team here at RNZ Pacific, till 5:34.